Hey everybody, I'm Chris with Decoding Cocktails, and thanks so much for being here today. I'm with Andrew from Kaldi's. Andrew, tell us a little about what you do for Kaldi's.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. I help out here with training and education on the retail side, and then the coffee side, I am involved with a little bit of green sourcing under Tyler, our Q grader owner, and then I help a little bit with QC as well.
Got it. So I was excited to come here because it's funny when I posted this. It's interesting how the Espresso Martini actually has it gets a lot of grief from people.
Yeah.
Because it is so popular, and yet what's interesting about it is it's beloved by people that love cocktails and people that don't like cocktails. But at the same time, there are people who they don't consider it to be an adult cocktail at times. And so it's interesting, like the responses it comes across. But I think understanding why coffee works in cocktails and whatnot is, I think, going to be an interesting thing to talk about. So thanks for taking time to do this.
Absolutely.
So where we're going to start, everybody, is the third cocktail we're going to make is a riff on the cocktail called the Jungle Bird, which is a delicious rum-based tiki cocktail. It comes from, originated in the country of Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur, and special affinity for me. I used to live in Malaysia. So what we're going to do right now to kind of start the process now for a cleaner, easier version of this, if you're watching this later, we're going to use about a teaspoon of coffee grounds right now. If you have time and want to come back, you can use a teaspoon of whole beans instead, because you can use a much longer extraction period right there. So there's no reason for me to be too specific right here, but I'm going to measure out kind of a, teaspoon. That's a generous teaspoon, but that's okay. And from here, so Campari is a brand that at times also is kind of becomes known as a category. So Italian red bitter liqueurs are like this Luxardo right here. So I'm going to measure out 4 ounces of this Luxardo bitter liqueur right here. And I am just going to take this now and I'm going to set it aside, and we're going to let that steep for kind of 15 or 20 minutes before we turn around to use it right here. We are going to kick things off with the Espresso Martini, but I wanted to turn it over to you first. Tell us a little bit about, and you and I were talking about this beforehand. So a number of Espresso Martini recipes will call for espresso, but some will actually call for cold brew instead. Talk to us about, not that they can't both be used, but why might a person consider using espresso versus cold brew? Or how should we think about the properties that differentiate?
Yeah, so the differentiation, start there. Espresso and cold brew, they're both brew methods. So they're just ways of taking whole bean coffee, grinding it up, and then turning it into some type of resulting beverage, right? So espresso, utilizing hot water and pressure, can help create this highly concentrated, incredibly aromatic solution. Whereas cold brew, you're usually taking a very coarse ground and you're letting room temperature water, or ambient temp, maybe you put it in the refrigerator, but you let it steep for, say, 20 hours. Mm-hmm. So the brew methods are drastically different. And then with a hot coffee, typically that hot water and the pressure involved, it's going to essentially extract different compounds. Whereas when water is nice and cool, you are not going to quite get all of the compounds you would find in hot coffee. Mm-hmm. And so when using them in different drinks, one, they're resulting in different flavor profiles. So if you're interested in a very specific flavor profile for a cocktail, you might take that into account when you're using either espresso or cold brew, depending on what you're looking for. We talked about some of the factors that play into how they interact with your other ingredients as well. And part of that we discussed was why does espresso foam up easier versus, say, cold brew? And part of that is what's going on during, obviously, the roasting process, but also during brewing. And so with your espresso, whenever you use it, it's so concentrated, but it also has what we discussed earlier, is melanoidins. These things will actually help act as an emulsifier and a stabilizer.
Okay.
They are produced during the roasting process and find their way into your cup.
And so, yeah, so for emulsifying, we're talking about certainly the texture, the foam that we often, the natural creaminess, the aeration we find in espresso when we're consuming it right there.
Definitely.
In general, when it comes to roasting process, and I'm sure that different roasters can take different beans on, but how is espresso roasted different than what might be a standard drip coffee? How should we think about even how you're selecting for what becomes an espresso ultimately?
Yeah, I think to begin, most roasteries or home roasters might have their own ideas of what they think of as espresso, because really it's just a way to brew coffee. Over time, many brands may have developed a type of roast profile and a sourcing pattern that they use to achieve uniform flavor throughout the year based on seasonality. But, when it comes to espresso, always remember it's a brew method. So really any roast can be used, right? Does it mean that one's better than the other? That's really up to you. But for us, what we like to do at Kaldi's is we have our 700 blend. And our 700 blend, it's named after our very first cafe, the address of it. But really, we're aiming for caramel and chocolate with a nice little bit of acidity, some dried fruits, maybe some citrus, right? And so we're aiming for sweetness. And we want that profile throughout the year. And so we source our coffees throughout the year based on seasonality and flavor profile. And then we have a roast profile that we have to adjust, of course, based on the coffees we're using. But that profile, along with the coffees we're using, is meant to achieve the 700 profile that we use in our cafes for espresso.
And that's helpful because I'm not as regular of an espresso drinker, and so to that end, it's good to know that like any bean, that you grind up, you could put through the process. It's more that people are typically going to have what more there is the style that they're roasting for.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Now, if you do really get into espresso, you will find, light roasts, they can be highly acidic because espresso is so concentrated. It really amplifies everything in that bean. And so for us, we don't really want to present our guests with high acidity shots all the time, right? And so we do roast in a way that kind of tames that acidity and really brings about more sweetness in the cup.
So to the quick history of this drink, the Espresso Martini was created by a guy named Dick Bradsell in London in 1986, I think. I have the number written down around there. And Dick Bradsell, along with this guy, Dale DeGroff. Dale DeGroff is, and history is imperfect, but what we kind of think about modern cocktail history is Dale DeGroff is often considered to be the godfather of the modern cocktail movement in the U.S., out of New York City, and Dick Bradsell out of London. And so when this cocktail came to be, the story goes that Dick had a supermodel in his bar because it was the place to be. And whether she'd been on a shoot for a long day or whatever, as the way she said to Dick, that she goes, I would like a drink that will wake me up and then, well, the other part of it's maybe not suitable for work right there, but she said, and then mess me up, or some work that might be a little bit more coarse than that. And so thus what was originally called the vodka espresso was created, but later became the espresso martini. There are 3 ingredients that have to go into the cocktail, and we'll talk about the 4th one. So obviously espresso or cold brew. Thankfully, I had Andrew make this a little while ago, so it has cooled down a little bit. So in general, you would typically want this to have not be coming straight out of having just pulled a shot. You'll obviously want some form of vodka as well. I buy everything wholesale and all in large things, so everything gets broken down into nondescript bottles most of the time. The 3rd thing is we're going to want some level of sweetener too. Sweetness is very key into a cocktail to do that. So there's 2 kind of ways you can make this. We'll need 2 ounces of vodka no matter what. From there, we're going to want an ounce of espresso and 3/4 of an ounce of simple syrup. If you want to get into a coffee liqueur like a Kahlua, Tia Maria, Mr. Black, what they recommend then is pulling a 1/4 ounce of your simple syrup out. So to use a half ounce of it, and to throw in a ½ ounce of this. This is obviously just going to amp up the coffee flavor, but because liqueurs by nature have sugar in them, if we're going to add them, we need to pull back on that sweetness a little bit right here. For simplicity's sake, so make it easier for people to play along at home, we are going to just do a standard build with our 3 ingredients and not worry about the coffee liqueur right here. For our coveted look of this, we got grounds right here. Would you mind procuring a couple of beans so we can set them on top as, yeah. So I'm going to grab an ounce of espresso right here. Perfect. I'm going to grab 3/4 of an ounce. It's nice to have 2 people because that way when you forget something, somebody's got your back. And then finally, I'm going to grab 2 ounces of my vodka right here. When it comes to spirit quality, the only thing I tend to say is, don't buy too cheap from there. If you want to use something super expensive, go for it. But in general, a good, $15, $25 bottle of vodka is going to be just fine for something like this. No need to break the bank because the quality of spirits overall has really risen over the past years. Would you mind opening that up and throwing some ice in this? Yeah. Oh, pop this guy right here. Perfect. So fill that little tin up for me. Gotcha. One thing that Andrew's comment about how these drink will ultimately froth up to the melanoidins. There you go. See, we'll have a link to that in there as well. To that end of things, perfect. Thank you. In order to better get this to emulsify and froth up, and this is important right here. So the other statement I didn't want to say in full, the number of bartenders I have literally heard quoted saying, when you make your espresso martini, you need to shake the shit out of this thing. This is something that under shaking it is going to give you less of that frothy head right here. So when we bring this cocktail to fruition, we want to really kind of get after right here. And overall, you're going to want to shake this for about a solid 10 plus seconds hard to kind of get a proper dilution right here. So I always like to say, just in case you're at home trying to figure out how to do this, and you have to figure out what way feels comfortable for you to shake. I put my non-dominant hand on the big tin on the bottom, dominant hand up here. Okay. So from there, this is all the minor things if you want to in the world, but you can get from here, get into more of a, run this through a fine strainer like so. Nice head, creamy head right there on top. This out of the way. And so from there, then often is preferred, and you can do it however you want, but people who want to get particular, and this is why also you shake hard, so you can get a nice froth on top. You can also then much more easily turn this into, floating artwork, if you will, right here. And so voila, the beloved espresso martini. And so again, not hard, 3 ingredients. From there, the only other thing that some people recommend is hitting it with a little bit of lemon zest on top. And so I went ahead and peeled these in advance. And so here's how you zest citrus peel. So this is the inside, that kind of the white pith from the lemon right here. You want to hold this lengthwise over the cocktail like so. And from there, you'll just go ahead and squeeze this, kind of bowing out over the top of the drink. And the good news is with the kind of the nice creamy texture on top, you'll be able to actually see the oils actually land on the espresso as it comes together. So when it comes to like the way you guys, I'm hitting you with stats right now, weren't prepared for. So like, and when it comes to like espresso, like, I mean, is it, in terms of sales, you said earlier that drip makes up 10 to 13 or something %. Where does espresso kind of fall in there on your guys' sales? Any idea?
Like in general, if you were to look at just a cafe, there's not a lot of straight espresso drinkers, right? So if you look at just straight espresso sales and you take a cafe and you look at a year's worth, you might see it compromise, say 1%, maybe 2%, depending on the cafe. Mm-hmm. But the majority of the drinks that you're selling really are going to have espresso involved in it, right? Whether it's a seasonal beverage, whether a latte, traditional cappuccinos, it's all going to have espresso. And so ultimately, when we look at the larger beverage category, I mean, it's involved in a large percentage of drinks.
Sure. Okay, got it. If you want to give this a little whirl or not, you don't have to, but yeah, please.
You don't mind?
No, please.
Okay.
Have to. So something else while he's hopefully enjoying this guy right here. I wanted to give a little, how do we do? I have a straw here, but so in terms of tweaking this, is the espresso too bold, too hot on the vodka, too much vodka on the
No. To me, a martini should be boozy.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
So it's a strong beverage anyway. So I actually really enjoy the hit of lemon.
Okay. Good.
I think it fully rounds out the cocktail.
That's great. But a note to that in terms of if you are tasting this and you would ever want it to be a little less boozy, you could always, there's one or two things you can do. You can always bump the simple syrup a little bit, or of course you can pull back on your spirit a little bit. So think of recipes as a guideline. So it's certainly a place to start. Kind of like the way that, at Kaldi's or whatever shop you go into, you might have, you call the latte or the cappuccino your way. These are the ways in which you can begin to massage things out on your own. A hack we were talking about that I wanted to be able to share with people too is, and this was interesting in terms of like roast profile. So we had talked about the fact that that when it comes to dark roast beans, so they tend to have more oils on the surface. So something I had heard. So you're at home, you love an old fashioned, you love a Negroni, you love a Manhattan. There are other drinks, but like those boozier stirred drinks. I had read about people stirring whole coffee beans when you're stirring your old fashioned. And then when you strain it, you can strain them out. But they said that dark roast was preferred in part because there's more oil content on the surface. And so easier for that to leach out into the drink in the 15 seconds that you're stirring it. What is it about roasting a bean darker that ultimately yields more oils on the surface of it? Why is that?
Yeah. What happens as you're roasting, right? Obviously you're achieving things like aromatic compounds and you're seeing the color begin to change as you're roasting your coffee. Towards the end of the roast, that color begins to darken and darken. And coinciding with that is the breakdown of the cellulose itself, or the cell structure of the bean, right? So as it breaks down and becomes more brittle, it's expanding a little bit and it's becoming more permeable. And so the natural oils that are in the bean will be able to leach out and then bead up on the surface.
Okay.
And that's why you're getting that oily look on those dark roasted coffees.
And I think about it a lot because I am more of a decidedly a light roast person. But when I'm visiting my father or other things like that, and I see the beans he uses, I'm always like, I know he likes a darker roast and I see it, but I didn't, that makes complete sense. I didn't, to my mind, understand why is this happening? I didn't know, is there an inferiority here? But to your point, it's more like it's breaking, it's just the bean breaking down.
It's the bean breaking down, right? So the oil is able to kind of leach out onto the surface. But when you talk about old school styles of roasting, sometimes they'll focus on that dark style of roasting. And it gives you, when you see coffee like that, you can expect a certain flavor profile. Typically a little more bitter, carbony, dark chocolates, some spices, but that's usually associated with that type of roast that you'll see.
Okay, got it. Check my notes here real quick, just to make sure we're hitting all of our talking points. I think we got most things so far. We're doing well. Perfect. So how about this? Yeah, this is really good. See? Get at it.
Thank you.
See, don't hate on the espresso martini. So where we're going to go next, just in case of getting your stuff ready, but the thing I did want to hit Andrew with as well is, so we're going to make a cocktail next called the Carajillo. And this is an extremely popular drink throughout much of Latin America. And it can be made a couple of different ways, where it calls on something called Licor 43. And this is a liqueur that comes out of Spain, and it's called 43 because there are 43 ingredients in it. And most of them, much like Coca-Cola is famous for, it's all trade secret. So we know that there are things like vanilla and orange, and there's tea in there, but it tends to have a lot of botanical notes and whatnot. But apparently gained a lot of fame because I guess it was a cocktail sometimes that some of the Cuban military would have. They would slam a shot of before they were running into the heat of battle. So there you go. When it comes to, and handle this question however you will, for the lay person out there who is, okay, they've been to Starbucks, Kaldi's, whatever, they like coffee, but when they walk into, the grocery store or the shop, it's a little bit more like, we talk about this in our world, like panic order. I want that,
Yeah.
Is there a way that you can begin to kind of slowly make more educated decisions about buying beans, about ordering at the shop? Obviously, having the courage to just ask a barista probably helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
But any tips you have for someone that wants to go deeper but isn't sure how to jump in?
Yeah. Well, my first thing is always go to YouTube. I find so much information on there. There's a lot of great content creators out there as well that have put out just amazing videos about everything coffee.
Sure.
Whether it's focusing on crema itself or origin, or roasting or latte art, whatever you like, you'll be able to find a wealth of resources online. YouTube is a great one. If you really want to look elsewhere, I love diving into different roasters' websites. Sometimes we'll have some great information, educational content. We have a lot of great information on our own website, just blogs about brewing, about origin that we've been to or we source from. So yeah, start there. Start off with YouTube, type in what you're interested in, just some great videos. And then there's a lot of really great literature as well.
Okay.
So you can dive into the history of coffee with some great books out there.
Okay.
And that's where I would start. Probably YouTube, grab yourself a good book and dive in that way.
Perfect. Preferably over a cup of coffee. So,
yes. Also, yes, the barista thing, go into a cafe. If they've got some, great guest service, ask your barista and they'll be willing to tell you whatever you want to know.
And probably it's one of those things where a little bit like in the bar world that it's not the best time to have an intimate conversation with your bartender Friday night at 8 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe go to your favorite shop when it's not like the morning crush or whenever they're really busy. But yeah, other than that, like I would imagine, people, typically you show that you're geeking out on something that they love and they're going to be like, oh boy, let's talk about this. Yeah. So just in case this takes longer than I suspect it will, right now, we're going to go ahead. Andrew, it was nice if you already prepped this Chemex for us. Yep. But so we're going to go ahead and take our Campari right now that's filtering. And I'm going to go ahead just right now and kind of set this in a coffee filter right here. And we're going to set up the side because we're going to use this in our third cocktail. But I'm going to let this kind of slowly work its way through just to make sure we don't hold up the show later. So the great news about this Carajillo cocktail can be made a couple of ways. But one of the easiest ways can be just using Licor 43 and espresso. It's going to be equal parts, 2 ounces of each. That said, if you have a brandy, a dark rum at home, something you can always do is pull kind of a 1/2 ounce of your Licor 43 out and throw a little 1/2 ounce of that in. It is going to bump the drink. To Andrew's point, it's going to give the alcohol a little bit more presence because this Licor 43, I don't know offhand, is 31% ABV. So it's close to a spirit, but not quite there. And so a way that you can kind of give your drink a little more flavor personality, but also a little bit more of a bump if you're looking for it too. So we're just going to go ahead and knock out 2 ounces of this guy right here. And we're going to go ahead and knock out 2 ounces.
Smell this?
Yes, please.
Interesting.
And yeah, so super popular in Spain and very popular in Latin America. There is also, and I'll have a link to this as well in the tape notes. There is an interesting margarita riff as well that calls on this as well.
Okay.
So kind of taking your traditional orange liqueur out, which is going to punch in right around this in terms of ABV level. But we're kind of adding a lot of this vanilla citrus note instead, and we're taking away that singular kind of bold orange note right there. And so this way, if you were to pop for a bottle of this, it's not a one-trick pony at home. I forget the cocktail's name offhand. It is called, I know it right here. It is called the Sweet Heat Cocktail. And it's just very basic. Tequila, lime, liqueur 43, and a little bit of agave nectar. So very, very similar to a traditional margarita build. We're just taking the orange liqueur out and putting the liqueur, taking the Cointreau out and putting liqueur 43 in its place right there. Would you mind, like icing me up right there?
Okay.
And so again, this is a drink you could build. Sorry, you hit that button. There we go. That's right. This is how you know it's live. This is run by real humans right here. So
yep,
this
the cooler.
This is like so yeah, this is a cocktail you could build in the glass, but again, we're gonna get that nice froth straight. And would you mind filling that up too?
Yep.
Look at that. There you go. And because this guy, unlike our espresso martini, is going to sit on ice, I probably don't need to keep this for quite as long right here, but still gonna want to give it a nice froth up right there. Perfect. All right. This guy right here. Something else I did want to cover in general, people out there, like a lot of us, always looking to maybe consume a little less booze these days. Let's see what this guy's all about right here. Tell you what, not mad. It's pretty good. And this is where I think, again, honing your palate's important. For me, the espresso might still actually be a little bold right here. And so something I could always do with that is hit it with a little bump of simple syrup, or if you want to feel getting real crazy, you could use like a turbinado sugar in the raw syrup. But that's going to help cut back on the acidity of that just a little bit right there. But all of it, again, comes down to your preference right there. What else should we talk about with Kaldi's and coffee right now? What haven't we covered yet right now?
So. Oh my gosh. I mean, it depends on how deep we want to go. But I think we've hit on some really great questions related to roast profile. The one thing I like to add with these cocktails that could be interesting with coffee is once you dive into coffee, you hop on YouTube, you do a little bit of reading, maybe you buy some different types of coffee.
Yep.
Well, then you'll start to realize the wide range of flavor profiles coffee has.
Yep.
So you can use the type of coffee, I think, for developing the flavor profiles of your cocktail.
Yep.
So like if you wanted your espresso martini to have a different profile that was a little more kind of fruit forward, let's say, or raspberries and marmalade, you can actually source or buy coffees that will give you those flavor profiles.
Yeah.
Whereas the 700 was caramely, chocolatey. Well, there's like natural processed Ethiopian coffees out there that when you try them, you're gonna immediately think like blueberries and strawberries, along with maybe a few other notes that you'll pick up. But that's the predominant flavor in certain coffees.
Okay.
And then you can take that to wherever. We talked about a coffee before we got on here that was apricots and very floral. Right. So I think that's something fun to dive into with your coffee journey, but also your cocktail journey that you can add in is different styles of coffee to produce different flavor profiles with the same style of drink.
Yeah. So at that point, I would think of this a little bit like I think about cooking seasonally. And so to me, I think at this point, it's the idea of, in the winter, we're using more, baking spices and kind of warming versus in the spring, maybe more bright floral vegetal things. Mm-hmm. And so to this Campari infusion, which is coming out nicely right here, at home, if you have multiple different types of beans on hand or like.
You want me to throw that filter away?
Sure, please. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, would you mind actually, while you're over there, would you mind giving this a quick
Got it.
Perfect. 2 people. It's great. So that's the other thing you could do as well. You could, when you have your first bag of beans at home, you could go ahead and infuse Campari one way, and you could do something else. And to that point, we're doing Campari. There's no reason you couldn't do other liqueurs. And this is where, again, you just kind of feel things out a little bit on your end. And this is why also we did 4 ounces and not a whole bottle. So if you come across an infusion recipe and they're like, get a whole bottle of whiskey and then infuse it with figs, which is really good, by the way. But there's no reason you can't do a 1/6 of a bottle. So just divide it, and that way you can afford to experiment a couple of times right here. So when it comes to Jungle Bird cocktail, it calls on a kind of a funky Jamaican rum. Jamaican rums kind of have this very sweet funkiness. They're often used, or they do something, a process called dunder, that makes the rum, gives it kind of this very, so the French term is called hogo, but it gives us this kind of very arresting, but very intriguing, funky smell to it. So what we need is a little bit of pineapple, and a Jungle Bird would traditionally call for lemon. We're going to do, call for lime. We're going to do lemon instead. And then we'll need just a little bit of sugar on here. So the recipe for everybody out loud, because I need to read it out loud for myself one time. We're going to do 1 ounce of our rum. We're going to do a 1/2 ounce of our Campari infused with coffee. We're going to throw in a touch of coffee liqueur. This is, again, part of how bartenders work. In a Jungle Bird, for example, I might use 3/4 of an ounce of my Campari. What we're going to do instead is we're going to use a 1/2 ounce of our coffee-infused Campari and a 1/4 ounce of this. So same amount of liqueur is going in. Thank you so much. Service around here is just amazing.
Anything for you.
A little too much, but no. So and so that is kind of at least how so many, and I would imagine, I don't know if this translates on your end of things. So many principles of cocktails are really just iterations on root foundation. So when we see, I would imagine, seasonal menus or other things roll out at a cafe, I would imagine that while something could taste very different, that a lot of times I would imagine you guys are playing the same formulas with different roasts, with a different milk, etc.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, obviously seasonality is huge. You mentioned it earlier. It's big in how we source coffee. So sourcing fresh coffee throughout the year based on what's arriving nice and fresh, what's in season. And it's also important as we're sorting these coffees, we're also looking at our menus. So if it's fall, what type of flavors are you using? Well, you're probably going to throw in some spices. You're looking for something to start warming up a little in terms of what's in the cup as the weather cools. And then hopping into winter and the holiday. And so every time we're looking at new flavors, but when we're kind of seeing how to execute it, you know, many times you're looking at a latte. And so you're basing it around espresso, dairy or a milk alternative, and a fun syrup to pair with it. So it's the same formula, but we're using those ingredients based on the season to kind of create something.
Yeah, so this is where like so much of it is just experimenting, but it's honing your palate over time just to kind of learn like what feels seasonally appropriate, and from there typically start working with that. All right. Get this started here. So I'm going to need just a little 1/2 ounce of this right here. Perfect. And then I'm going to grab a little 1/4 ounce, kind of drive home the coffee a little bit more, of this Tia Maria right here. Perfect. I need, all right, refresh myself right here. Too much to remember. 1 ounce of pineapple juice. I highly, highly recommend always using fresh lemon and lime. I do find this is not from concentrate pineapple, and that tends to work pretty well right there. So I feel like for a juice like pineapple, that's a little bit more reliable. And then I need a little 1/2 ounce of my lemon right here. So I'll even post a link to Jungle Bird in there, but you'll find that it's going to be a pretty similar build right here. And then I need 1 ounce of this one right here. So our Jamaican rum, because this is a white label bottle, and you might be a little less familiar with Jamaican rum, in most liquor stores, probably even most supermarkets, you're going to find brands like Appleton Estate. It's a wonderful Jamaican rum. Plantation rums, Xamayca. Do you mind again, sir? Can we do?
Nice, I've got it down.
This time we're pros. And this is also the kind of thing as well where, while I didn't bring it with me tonight, you could always, of course, have fun with this, it depends on more tropical drink. If you did use fresh pineapple to get your use, having some pineapple fronds on hand, perfect. Could always be a very nice touch right here. Oh, guess what? See, this is what happens when you're working too fast. And then they called for a little 1/4 ounce of syrup. Let's give ourselves that. Just tone down a bit. So. Oh. I'll tell you what we should do. We should get one extra. We should both give this one a little crack.
Yeah.
Extra little cup right here. So this is certainly the kind of thing where also, if you were using a large sphere, you could always sit a couple beans on top. Again, you could park a couple of pineapple fronds in here as well to kind of, again, make this feel a little bit more tropical in this regard. But very simple infusion as you saw. So not really too much work right here. So there you are, sir.
Either way, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
Yeah. And I would say that, to me, based on kind of the infusion being rushed a little bit, it could probably use a little bit more coffee flavor, but like you still get a nice taste on the Jamaican rum right there.
Yeah, I like it playing kind of an accent flavor.
Mm-hmm. So you don't really have a whole issue of it being necessarily, and it's a way you can certainly think about another way to use coffee in terms of, stirring beans in a basic stirred cocktail or infusing it into a spirit or a liqueur as well is another great way to play right there. I already asked you before, but I get, and so so one, I've certainly seen the, get on the Kaldi channel for sure. I know know James Hoffman is certainly people like to follow his work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
he's done an amazing job when it comes to education and just entertaining videos as well.
Yes. So, but also just a super dorky guy. So
yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Well, thank you for giving us a little look into things.
Of course.
But yeah, I guess anything else we haven't covered on your end?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. Any other questions you have? Anything you have related to coffee? I will always do my best to tell you.
Yeah, I'm trying to let's make sure because I certainly wanted to think about that. Oh, one thing we do want to talk about.
Yeah.
So, because we have our little toy right
That's
here.
That's right.
So, this is what happens sometimes when you're moving too fast. You can't remember what all you're supposed to talk about.
Well,
please go ahead.
Yeah, no,
you already know the lead off here. So.
Yes. Here we were discussing, what about if you don't have an espresso maker at home? Because a full espresso setup at home can be rather pricey, and it does take a little bit. There's a learning curve.
Yep.
To really master it. So how do you go about maybe if you're watching this or you don't have an espresso setup? What is kind of that next best thing? And you don't want to go the cold brew route. You want to really kind of focus on that espresso style route to make your coffee-based cocktails or whatever. So, one kind of hack you can do is use an AeroPress. Now, the AeroPress has been around for a good while now. It's a fairly well-known brewer. It's definitely affordable and really very easy to use. And if you get one, it's also very versatile. So you can use it to make different styles of coffee, whether you like an 8-ounce cup or whether you like something a little more concentrated. So you could get an AeroPress. And if you really want to go in on it, you can buy this. It's called the Prismo attachment from Fellow.
Okay.
And so the AeroPress itself will not produce enough pressure to make espresso, but you can make something concentrated. You have a question?
No. And so I like that there's an attachment that's going to help you better. And so explain this. So obviously, you've seen espresso made before or whatever. And so that machine is injecting a ton of force to quickly force the water through those grounds.
Yes.
And so with the AeroPress being this plunger that is pushing the water through the grounds, this is going to help do this in a similar fashion. Right here.
Yeah. So what we do here, we take it out, you get everything set up. You can do a pretty tight coffee to water ratio. And then when you put this on there, it has a little metal filter, essentially to kind of obviously hold back your coffee. And then it has a restrictor on the inside. And so in your espresso machines, as water comes through the boiler, through the group head, there is a restrictor as well. There's a flow restrictor. And this is all helping to manage the flow rate, but also it's going to help produce pressure out. Yeah. So you can actually get pretty close. Yeah. It's still not going to be exactly a one-to-one comparison with an espresso machine, but both of these are very affordable. So if you want something that's similar and you don't want to invest everything into a grinder and an espresso machine setup, then this is a good route to go.
You know what? And when you mentioned it, I understood innately from the way we talked about it as applying pressure, but I can appreciate having a different head is restricting the flow and therefore ramping up the pressure.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, this is a cool thing. It's got its own cult following.
Yeah, and I have one, and like it is amazing how many coffee dorks talk about the AeroPress, but not having it exported, I've never learned of the attachment.
Yes.
Before, so
I mean, there's an endless amount of attachments you can get for this. Perfect. There's different filters you can get. So
the AeroPress's accessories have accessories.
Yes.
Perfect. Andrew, this is great. Thanks so much for taking time.
Absolutely. Definitely enjoyed being here. So
cool. Thanks everybody for tuning in.